All eyes snapped to attention the moment the frail, gray-haired man in handcuffs stepped into the courtroom. His shoulders slumped beneath a faded military jacket 2 sizes too large, and the harsh fluorescent lights revealed deep lines etched across his weathered face. When the clerk asked his name, the man's voice trembled as he replied, "Mason Quinn, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps." A stunned hush fell over everyone present. No one anticipated what would happen next. Mason Quinn shuffled forward, each step slowed by arthritis and old war wounds that never fully healed. At 69 years old, he was a shell of the proud Marine he once was. The polished metals no longer adorned his uniform. Instead, he wore clothes picked from a shelter. Donation bin. Decades ago, he had stood tall in dress blues, medals gleaming in the sunlight. Now, he waited for judgment under the same harsh lights that highlighted every crease on his face. The bailiff called the docket. Docket 47B, City versus Mason. "Quinn, disturbance of the peace, trespassing, resisting arrest." Mason rose slowly. The prosecutor, a young man in a tailored suit with perfect teeth, stood and addressed the court first. "Your Honor, the defendant has been repeatedly warned about loitering behind the Jefferson Street Café. The owner has filed 3 complaints this month alone." What the prosecutor didn't say was that Mason had sat quietly behind the cafe near the dumpster, seeking warmth from the kitchen's exhaust vent when December's temperatures dipped well below freezing. He never begged for money or bothered customers. He just tried to stay alive. Officer James Reynolds, the arresting officer, took the stand next. In his crisp uniform, he adjusted his badge and said, "I found the defendant behind the cafe. At 11:45 p.m., he refused to vacate the premises when instructed." Mason's jaw clenched. He had not refused. He had only asked the cook, Jimmy, for 5 more minutes to finish the half-eaten sandwich Jimmy had slipped him. But arguing at the moment felt pointless, just as it felt pointless now. "Your Honor," the prosecutor continued, "this is Mr. Quinn's 3rd citation this year. We recommend community service and a 30-day no-trespass order for all downtown businesses." A no-trespass order meant more than just a ban from the cafe. It would bar Mason from the 4th Street shelter, the only warm bed he knew in months, and from Tuesday and Thursday meals at St. Luke's Church. Without those few basic supports, true isolation in the dead of winter loomed. The judge, Olivia Parker, peered over half-moon reading glasses and asked Mason directly, "Do you have representation today?" Slowly, Mason shook his head. His public defender had been summoned to an emergency in another courtroom. "Would you like to make a statement on your own behalf?" Judge Parker pressed, her tone courteous but firm. Mason cleared his throat, his voice rusty as though unused for years. "No excuses, Your Honor. I was only trying to stay warm." "Any particular reason you chose that location?" the judge asked, her gaze unwavering. Something unreadable flickered across her stern features. The cook, Jimmy, came to mind first. "Jimmy sometimes leaves extra food. I've known him since I was a kid. My father served with him in Desert Storm." The judge shifted her focus. "And your military service?" Her interest was unusual for such a case. Military background typically held little relevance here. Mason straightened his back. "United States Marine Corps, 1975 to 1995. Staff Sergeant, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines." The words slipped out with practiced clarity, a momentary reminder of the disciplined Marine he once was. The judge made a note and continued reviewing his file. A shadow passed over her face as she studied his personnel record. Before she could speak again, the courtroom doors swung open. A well-dressed man in an expensive suit strode in, carrying a polished leather briefcase. Mason glanced at him, confusion mixing with awe. "Your Honor, Alexander Rossi for the defendant," the man announced confidently. "I apologize for the interruption, but I've been retained to represent Mr. Quinn." Mason stared in disbelief. He hadn't hired a lawyer, couldn't have afforded one like this. The judge's eyes narrowed. "This representation was not filed in advance. Why the late notice?" Rossi inclined his head respectfully. Very recent development, Your Honor. I request a brief recess to confer with my client. Judge Parker paused, studying Rossi's calm demeanor, then turned her gaze to Mason. Her expression remained unreadable. Finally, she declared, "The court will take a 15-minute recess." Rising, she exited swiftly into her chambers. As the judge left, Mason looked at the stranger beside him. His voice was a whisper. "I can't afford a lawyer." Rossi gave him a gentle nod. "You won't need to. The firm of Williams, Rossi, and Parker is handling your case pro bono." Mason frowned at the familiar name. "Parker? Like the judge?" "Exactly," Rossi confirmed. "Olivia Parker. She's part of our firm now." Behind closed doors, Judge Olivia Parker removed her glasses and sat heavily in her chambers. 20 years on the bench had taught her to show no emotion, but her hands trembled now. She unlocked a drawer and withdrew a worn photograph of herself as a young woman, standing beside her brother, Lieutenant Jack Parker, in his Marine dress uniform. Jack's arm was around her shoulders, smiles bright on both faces. Beside the photo lay Jack's last letter home, worn thin from endless readings. In it, he described a firefight outside Fallujah where a senior NCO named Mason Quinn had raced across open ground under heavy fire to rescue him. "If not for Staff Sergeant Quinn," he wrote, "none of us would have made it." 2 weeks after writing that letter, Jack died when his vehicle hit an IED. Olivia pressed trembling fingers to her lips. After the funeral, Marines had sought her out, telling stories of Jack's bravery and how Quinn had saved him. She had tried to locate Quinn then, but the military explained that he'd been redeployed immediately, later discharged after a traumatic brain injury left him unable to continue. Years of inquiries went nowhere, until now. A knock on the door startled her. She rose and opened it to find Alexander Rossi outside, looking concerned. "Olivia, what's going on?" he asked quietly. They had been law partners before Oliver's marriage reshaped her life, and Olivia trusted him like family. She motioned him inside, placing the photograph on her desk. "It's him, Alex," she whispered. "The Marine who saved Jack. He's the homeless man in my courtroom." Rossi's eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. "Mason Quinn? The one you've been seeking for years?" She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "My brother wrote about him in his last letter. They served together in Fallujah in 2004. Jack was the one who got hit while trying to help the wounded. Quinn pulled him back under heavy fire, then provided covering fire so they could all retreat." She paused, collecting herself. "Now he's here, homeless and unrecognized." Rossi placed a hand on her arm. "What are you going to do?" Olivia straightened, resolve shining through her grief. "I'm not recusing myself. I can't let him slip away again. There are ethical issues, of course, but there are also ethical issues in how we treat those who sacrificed everything for our country." 15 minutes later, the courtroom doors opened and Judge Parker re-entered, flanked by 3 uniformed Marines. A colonel, a master sergeant, and a corporal marched behind her, the corporal carrying a polished wooden case. A ripple of surprise ran through the gallery as Mason recognized the uniforms. He instinctively stood at attention, muscle memory kicking, in despite his worn body. Judge Parker took her seat, removed her glasses completely, and addressed the courtroom with a steady voice that belied her emotion. "Before I proceed, I must disclose a personal connection to this case. The lieutenant mentioned by the defendant, Lieutenant Jack Parker, was my brother." Murmurs filled the room as Mason's eyes widened in shock. Olivia continued, speaking plainly but with unmistakable pride. "On April 17, 2004, Staff Sergeant Mason Quinn saved my brother under heavy enemy fire near Fallujah. I have sought Sergeant Quinn for years, but could not locate him until now." She gestured toward Colonel James Matthews, who stepped forward. Colonel Matthews saluted Mason before speaking. Staff Sergeant Quinn, the Marine Corps has been attempting to locate you for years. Under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative, your file was flagged for review. Fresh evidence about your actions in Iraq prompted a reassessment of your awards and benefits. He motioned to the corporal, who opened the wooden case. Inside lay a gleaming Navy cross hanging from a blue ribbon. By order of the Secretary of the Navy, and in recognition of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action on April 17, 2004, the Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Staff Sergeant Mason J. Quinn, Colonel Matthews announced. Your Silver Star has been upgraded accordingly. Your bravery not only saved Lieutenant Parker and 5 other Marines, but also disrupted an enemy ambush that might have destroyed the entire convoy. A stunned hush fell over the courtroom. Mason's stoic expression melted, disbelief flooding his features. "There's some mistake," he whispered. "I was just doing my job." "No mistake, Sergeant," Colonel Matthews replied firmly. "This is long overdue." One by one, uniformed Marines and veterans in civilian clothes rose to attention, rendering salutes to Mason. Their bearing, recognizable even in plain attire, echoed the discipline they had learned in boot camp. Then came a ripple of standing spectators, until every person present, including the prosecutor, had risen in respect. Even the judge's gavel seemed momentarily forgotten, as the courtroom paid homage to a veteran they had failed to recognize. Judge Parker's voice cracked, with emotion as she finally spoke. "In light of these circumstances, all charges against Staff Sergeant Mason Quinn are dismissed with prejudice." She struck her gavel with finality. "This court stands adjourned." As the formalities concluded, the Master Sergeant approached, Mason with a tablet. "Sir, we've been seeking you to correct your VA benefits. Your disability rating is now 100% service-connected, retroactive to your discharge date. That means substantial back pay, full medical coverage, housing allowance, and education benefits should you choose them." Mason stared at the tablet as if it held some impossible miracle. "What does that mean?" he asked, voice heavy with bewilderment. The Master Sergeant smiled gently. "It means you'll have stability, no more bureaucratic delays, and Mr. Alexander Rossi's firm will ensure everything is filed immediately." Jimmy, the cook who had left Mason scraps of food, approached with tears in his eyes. "My old man always said, if I ever meet a Marine named Mason Quinn, I owe him everything. I never realized it was you." He extended a trembling hand, which Mason took, gratitude and disbelief mixing on his weathered face. Even the prosecutor stepped forward, remorse plainly written in his expression. "Sir, I had no idea who you were. Please accept my apology." Mason, the weight of unacknowledged honor lifting from his shoulders, stood amid the sudden attention, dignity slowly returning to his posture. Judge Parker descended from the bench and stopped before him. Her voice was soft, but every word held unwavering conviction. "My brother used to say, no Marine gets left behind while I'm breathing. Today, Sergeant Quinn, we finally keep that promise." 2 weeks later, Mason stood before a mirror in an apartment he could hardly believe was his. The Veterans Affairs housing program had expedited his placement into a 1-bedroom unit in a complex designed for formerly homeless veterans. The walls were bare except for one frame, his newly awarded Navy Cross in a display case mounted beside his original Purple Hearts and service medals, items Alexander Rossi's firm had retrieved from a storage unit auctioned off years ago. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Judge Olivia Parker, dressed casually and carrying a small box. "May I come in, Sergeant Quinn?" she asked, stepping inside. Mason offered a shy nod. "Please, Mason is fine. Outside my courtroom, I'm only Olivia," she said with a warm smile. They sat at a small table in the sparse living area, the air between them filled with unspoken memories. Olivia opened the box and removed a neat stack of letters. "These are from Jack, my brother. He wrote every week while deployed. This one mentions you specifically." She handed Mason a letter dated April 18, 2004. Mason's hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. In Jack Parker's neat handwriting were the words, "Mom and Dad, don't worry. I'm safe thanks to Sergeant Quinn. Yesterday, during that ambush, he moved through gunfire to reach me when I was hit. He refused to leave me behind, even when I told him to go. No Marine gets left behind on my watch," he said. "I don't know how we would have survived without him." Silence settled between Mason and Olivia. Finally, Olivia spoke softly. "He wrote about you often, Mason. He said he wanted to live up to your example. After Jack died, I went to law school. The Veterans Court Program and the Housing Initiative. It all began because of what Jack wrote about you, showing me how our system fails those who served." Mason averted his gaze. "I'm no hero, just did what needed doing." "That's what heroes always say," she replied gently, reaching out to place a hand on his shoulder. "There's something else you should know. On the day Jack died, he was leading a patrol to root out an insurgent cell targeting civilians. He volunteered for that mission." Mason's breath caught. He remembered Jack's final letter, how Jack had spoken of trying to honor the example Mason set. "He lived the way he did because of you," Olivia continued, her voice steady but tender. "It wasn't your fault he died later. He lived with courage because of what you did." Tears welled in Mason's eyes as he looked at the gentle snowfall outside the window. For 20 years he carried the burden of survivor's guilt, wondering if rescuing Jack had only prolonged the inevitable. Now Olivia's words pierced that guilt. "All these years I thought my service meant nothing," he whispered, voice trembling. "But it meant everything. To Jack, to those other Marines, and to you." Olivia smiled through her own tears. "It meant everything. You've given more lives meaning than you'll ever know." She rose to leave and placed a gentle hand on Mason's shoulder. "Jack used to say the measure of a Marine isn't what he does when everyone's watching, but what he does when no one is. You lived that truth, Mason, even when the world turned away." As snowflakes drifted against the window pane, Mason stood a little taller than he had in years. A quiet dignity returned to his bearing. "Someone finally remembered my name," he murmured. "And you'll never be forgotten," Olivia replied softly. Outside, the city lay hushed beneath a blanket of white, a silent promise of new beginnings. In that peaceful moment, something long broken began to heal. Not just for Mason Quinn, but for everyone touched by his unrecognized honor. Because sometimes, a single moment of recognition is enough to help a man stand tall once more. If you believe that honor doesn't fade just because we grow poor or old, type respect to show you stand on the side of kindness and justice. Don't forget to subscribe to Ray Williams Stories to hear more stories that touch the heart.